Welcome to this week's Lunchtime Learning with The Pitch. My name is Christopher Goodfellow and I'm part of the team behind the competition. Today we're going to spend half an hour talking about scaling your startup team. So really what you can do from those kind of first few team members, co-founders, and how you can build a team around your business. Some of the challenges you'll face, how to tackle attracting talent to small teams and how to know when to pull the trigger and make that hire. I'm going to be joined by two people providing kind of different perspectives on that. So first is from Lilk, one of the founders of Lilk, who won one of the regional finals from London, will be taking part in the grand final next week. And also Greg from Agora, who are one of the pitch partners. So very much got the expertise of scaling companies and looking for talent. And hopefully we'll have lots of really practical tips for you as you navigate what is quite a difficult journey. So first of all, I'd love to just kind of introduce the guests. So Greg, if you want to take yourself off mute, just say hello and tell everybody watching kind of who you are and what you do.
Hi guys, I'm Greg. I'm one of the founders at Agora Talent. My focus is on our scale up and startup business. So I have the job of working with some of the most inspirational founders across the UK and Europe and help them attract some of the best talent to their leadership teams as they grow their businesses.
Brilliant. And you also help VCs, is that right?
We do, yeah, absolutely. So my business partner Felix helps our VC and some PE clients as well recruit investors and principals and leadership individuals within those businesses as well. So we see both sides of the ecosystem.
Both sides of the table, brilliant. And then Sebastian, it'd be great to hear from you and kind of what Lilk is and where you're at in your journey at the moment.
Yeah, thanks for having me. Hi, everyone. Yes, I'm Bastian, one of the founders of Lilk. So we're a plant milk startup. We blend different ingredients to make the plant milks taste really nice. So we launched in January. There's three of us in a sort of core founding team. Myself, Emily, our COO, she kind of makes things happen, really keeps our clients happy, all that kind of stuff. And then Charlotte, our chief creative, who looks after all things brand creative stuff. So that's quite a small team. And then we obviously are surrounded by a network of freelancers and companies and advisors as well. So that's it. Before that, I worked in tech and science. I used to be a scientist. So this is a kind of new industry for us.
Do you want to just give us a quick recap on how far you are in your journey as well, Bastian? Because I remember from, obviously quite an impressive pitch. It'd be good to know sort of when you launched and how much traction you have so far.
Yeah, no, we've been super lucky so far. People have really responded well. We launched in January and we're listed with Ocado, with Waitrose, with Holland & Barrett in wholesale. And we also ship abroad as far as Kuwait and South Korea and a few other places. So yeah, we've had an amazing response so far. We just want to keep that growth going, really.
Brilliant. It's amazing to hear how you've won and managed to achieve so much in such a short space of time, especially as we've had sort of global supply chain issues and no doubt that's kind of caused a lot of thinking for your business. And how was that?
Yeah, no, it's been terrible. I'm not gonna lie. The subject of today's discussion is very relevant, I guess, to what's happening in the government right now. Getting the right talent in the right place is very important. So I hope that happens there as well. It's been really tough, but we've been quite lucky. We won a bunch of awards quite early on. Like the Independent names us the best plant milk, ever, and we won this sort of Grocer New Product Award, which is like the biggest innovation award we have in our industry. So that really gave us a big boost. And then we got backing from sort of legendary investor in Giles Brooke, who's kind of opened many doors for us. So we've had some it's been intense. It's been very difficult. A lot of sleepless nights and horror stories and things going wrong all the time. But it's been going okay.
Brilliant. Good to see you smiling throughout. I think so. When it comes to team building, the place I wanted to start at is kind of when it's the right time to sort of pull the trigger and make a hire. So for a lot of startups at the beginning of their journey, that's it's a big commitment. It's not only the money, but it's the responsibility of taking somebody on, and just knowing that those first few hires are so critical to getting the journey right. So it'd be great to hear first, maybe from you, Bastian, on what that is like sort of emotionally, and any advice you have for other founders that are kind of going through that stage.
So the when and the what, is that right?
Yes.
Yeah, so we had a quick chat with Gregory just then about, how we're going to make this kind of thing useful and not indulge in truisms. But I guess for me, it's really recognizing what your skill gap is, right? Okay, which industry am I in? Do I have world-class talents? Can I go and disrupt this space with the talent that I have? Is that realistic? Or is it just, my ego is too big and I really need some help? So I think that's the first thing, recognizing which skills gap you're going to need to fill. That was very important for us, which is why we selected the partners that we did, which is why we brought Charlotte on board to run things really. I've run growth and marketing teams before, but that doesn't qualify me to build a brand from scratch. So I think recognizing that you can't do all this stuff on your own is very important. So figuring out what the gap is. Knowing when you're going to reach or when you have reached max capacity is very difficult, right? There's stories of people hiring too soon and hiring wrong. You hear that a lot, and I guess you hear the bad stories more than you hear the good ones. So maybe there's a slight bias there. So it depends on your runway, how well you're funded. If you've got a decent runway, I think Greg made a point in our brief discussion earlier that it takes a long time to find the right talent. So don't wait too long, because by that time you might have run out of gas. So that's something that maybe you want to comment on, Greg.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it does take it takes a lot of time, and you need to be ready for that. But it's a constant decision that you have to look at your business. I think if you recruit someone that's too senior and your business isn't at the level that can utilize that talent, it means that they can get disinterested, and it can have a really harmful effect on your business as well. So you have to really, but you also have to kind of factor in the fact that it could take 4 or 5 months, and you're constantly on this journey. So I think you have to look at recruitment and look at your talent pipelines on a really long-term perspective, and make sure that you're really cultivating that pipeline as you go. I think what Bastian said there around some of the partners, and I think it's really crucial when you look at your own founding teams in understanding not only where the skill gaps are, but where you can plug them with people that aren't necessarily hires. So I think when you're looking at the investors you're speaking to, if they've got experience in developing functions where you've not sort of got that skill set, that can be really, really valuable, because they can give good strategic advice and really help you make sure you make that right hire. And then also means that you can potentially recruit someone more junior into those functions because they have them as a mentor or someone that they can lean on. So I think making sure that you have that longer term approach to how your team looks like, and that really comes from looking within and looking at your own qualities, and that can be a little bit tough, but you do find out pretty quickly, I think, when you start a business what they look like.
So you both hit that really important point there of like you need to build a team that can execute on this vision, right? And that team doesn't necessarily all have to be employees. It could be a mixture of advisors, co-founders, contractors. There's different ways to kind of bring in talent. And I think investors do always think about that. Have they got all of their bases covered effectively? So can we go a little bit deeper maybe on like other ways you've seen people bring in talent, like Bastian, if you've used kind of advisors or contractors or any examples like that?
Yeah, so there's the classic dilemma: do I insource or do I outsource? And every situation is different for every business, every department. Sometimes it makes sense to do one or the other. But I would say that if you're not exactly sure what the right makeup is, it could be that you start with an outsourced solution. It could be you go to freelancers first. And when you have discussions with partners of freelancers, for example, maybe you can find out if they're open to maybe a medium-term contract later on. And if you are hiring a contractor already, would they be interested in a long-term position, maybe even with equity if there's someone who brings a ton of value add? So have those discussions, knowing where those people might fit in later on is a really good idea, especially if you want to stay lean, which is a good idea right now when the investment market is not super liquid. So you want to be careful about what sort of commitments you make. So that could be a good way to do that. And then I think a lot of industries have their own little hubs, their own little networks, and through WhatsApp and Telegram and Facebook groups, those have really increased in importance. And for us in the food and drinks industry, it's really, really great. There's loads of resources you can tap into to help you make those decisions and to find good people. So I would definitely recommend to find what those networks are in your respective industry and tap into them as much as possible. You'll be surprised how useful and nice people are, and if you just ask for help.
Definitely. And, from my own experience as well, we've had almost half my team has been brought on as contractors or freelancers and then eventually made the leap. And that's not right for every contractor for sure. But for both parties, you just had that test run. You've got to know each other, you've got to know the culture and done it sort of fairly risk-free. But Gregory, you were about to chime in there, so do
yeah, I think that's a really important point. I think when you're looking at a more flexible solution like that, it's so much easier to turn it on and off if it's not working. Whereas I think if you make the wrong hire, it can have a massive impact on the culture of your business, but then also the pain points when you're going through actually exiting someone from a business is really tricky, especially when you've got everything going on within a startup environment. So I really would implore people to kind of focus on, make sure they're really, really ready to make that permanent hire before exhausting all the other opportunities you have to find people.
And if you do outsource the sort of the talent selection or the sort of onboarding process to an agency, one common misconception with sort of brands and companies is that the agency will just try to plug your talent and just get it on board as quickly as possible. That's not the case, because that doesn't really serve you guys, does it, Gregory? You'll want someone to be in the right place for as long as possible, because that benefits you from a financial point of view, but also reputation point of view, I guess. So find out if you do outsource the recruitment, then maybe try to opt for that option first. See if that your agency can support you in finding these sorts of contracts or freelancers that could build into something more later on.
Yeah, 100%. I think it's important, and I think if you do go down that track, I think some of the best recruiters or support that you have out in there will tell you that it's not the right time to recruit that role, or you should be focusing in other directions. And I think making sure that you've got someone that you can bounce those ideas off, I think, is really important.
I mean, is there anything else you'd say there, Greg, about sort of that selection of agency process, or
I think it's really important. For us, it was we actually used agencies very early on in our own journey when we started Agora. We got to the point where the time it was taking to go out and really map the recruitment market, because a lot of people thought it was crazy that we were paying recruitment fees as a recruitment business, but we just didn't have the mapping or that area really mapped out. And also we felt that it wasn't necessarily as natural for us to be selling our own business as it was for people outside, where I think they can take a really objective view on what the selling points are of your business. So we found a sort of small agency that really got to understand us and pulled the real sort of selling points of what we were looking for, and could really go into a full map of the whole market. And we found it really useful when we were early on. But I think you really need to believe in that person. You have to spend a lot of time investing into the agency to make sure that they understand your vision. They can really sort of sell effectively the business. They're going to be speaking to people that's never heard about your company before. So you almost have to test their own elevator pitch on your company. And then also make sure they understand the fabric of your business as well, so that the talent that they are presenting to you are people that would work in a startup environment. I think if you go down the route of looking at recruiters that are potentially too corporate, it can be tricky, because it does take a certain individual to thrive in the chaos and ambiguity that startups can lead you to. So definitely spend a lot of time and always reference massively. I think if you've like any sort of good recruiter that you'll be working with will have done work with, and will speak about some of the work they've done. And I think it's always worth picking up the phone and speaking to founders and understand how they work with those businesses as well. So do a lot of time, put a lot of time into it, and and I think the results are worth it.
Brilliant, thanks, Greg. Bastian, Greg mentioned something there about kind of finding people that would thrive in startup environments. I think that's something that's critical in hiring, because it is very different from working in a bigger company. And you obviously have a background not just with Lilk, but building sort of very fast-growing teams. So is there any kind of identifiers for you, or any questions you ask to try and work out whether somebody will suit, what is effectively quite an unpredictable and unusual environment, being part of a startup?
Oh my gosh, yes. And I think when you go through the recruitment process, I would strongly advise that you have several stages, including, people call it a culture stage, but I wouldn't even call it that. I would just call it a startup readiness stage almost, or find a snappier name, if you will, to really find out, is this someone who's going to be able to take all of the BS that comes with this, being either a founder or an early stage recruits. It's very, very different from a big company that has structure and has everything in place. You're gonna have to find your way around what to do. You need really specific skills to be able to organize yourself in the unknown, and that can be very stressful. So yeah, making sure that this is someone who's going to be able to sort of pass that test is very important. I was my previous employer was a tech startup, and the job was to grow the team from a couple of people to 32 in 5 months, right? That was the ask. That was my first mission. And also I was helping recruiting in other teams, as one of those culture stages. And I think I rejected about 12 or so people at the very last stage. That's for that final check. Not because they weren't great or anything, just because I didn't think they'd enjoy it. So I think that's really important, yeah.
Is it a question for both of you, I guess, but is there any particular questions you'd suggest asking, or stages you'd add to that process to try and address that need to know that they'll fit in that kind of environment?
Specific scenarios, so specific questions, qualifying questions. This has happened. How do you feel about it? What do you do about it? Something that's going to be very specific to when the crap hits the fan. Something that replicate something that's happened yesterday, because more likely than not, something went really wrong yesterday in your company, and you're still pretty pissed off about it. So use that, put that in a questionnaire, come up with a library of 100 or so questions. Just pick and choose which one you think are most relevant for the role. If it's a tech role, then maybe it needs to be a bit more specific. But if it's anything else, then it could just be, how do you react to this? Who's at fault? How would you speak to such a person if this went down? And those specific scenarios are, I think, the only way to get to a point. Because if someone isn't gonna take the right approach, it'll be very obvious really quickly.
Yeah, and I think that sometimes gets away from that. People that do come from bigger companies will sometimes sort of do that sort of we did thing, and it's not always clear how much they actually owned themselves. So you kind of need to find ways to break that down. And Greg, anything you'd add there? Any tips?
Yeah, I agree. I think the scenario-based interviewing, I think, is a really good, effective way of deciphering that. I always quite like quite open questions. I think when people come we talk a lot about case studies, and sometimes people do a lot of prep work into it. And I think sometimes actually the best ones are really loose and open questions, and you can actually see where a candidate will focus on things like what resources will they put on. Often you'll find that if a candidate will come in and want to hire 10 people or bring on this massive media agency and the decisions they're looking to make in the budgets and spend, I think, often show the mindset of someone. So I like to keep things quite open and see how someone thinks and moves, and whether that can work within within a leaner startup.
I think that's right. If you're going to hire a strategic role, you do want to have those in, because you don't really care about the bottom line answer. It's the approach that matters, right? That's what you're trying to account for. Is that right?
Yeah, spot on. Yeah, I think that really is. It's trying to really understand someone's thinking, how they can, because I think one of the big shifts is you're going in from an environment and into an environment which is leaner. You have your runway to be worrying about, and you need to make sure that you're maximizing every pound and every hour within a business. And I think that's one of the biggest shifts when coming from a more corporate environment into a startup world as well.
Yeah, I would agree. If it's more entry level, often startups want the guy that's a raw talent and that's going to be cheaper and that wants to step up. So when you're trying to make those hires, then going for more specific case studies I think is the right way to go. Behavioral stuff.
Yeah. And is it, just to carry on that point though, you've sometimes got that choice between a sort of more junior generalist and getting somebody that's basically a higher end, but very specific skills that they might need to scale. That's a really hard thing to weigh up, right? Which way do we go?
I think that's made me think about something which I've thought about before, which is that it's really, really hard recruiting, and you're going to get it wrong more often than not. So even if you're really sure about your decision, you might regret it later down the road. But it's just we're not that good at selecting talent in just a few hours worth of chats. It's impossible, really. So first of all, you're gonna mess up very often. So be ready for that. So yeah, I think that's an important point to make. That it's not always easy to know what level. Experience, not experience. Is it someone who's going to be hungry? It's very, very difficult to know. Exactly what's required. Yeah.
Great, really useful stuff there. Jumping back to the actual recruitment process or the process of finding people itself, is there any advice you'd share around kind of how to look for people, how to identify candidates, kind of when you're a new company and you don't maybe have this developed an employer brand?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of routes you can go down, and I think it's I think if you haven't got, because agencies can be an expensive route, I think it's worth the time. But in a lot of cases where you're much earlier on, it's not the right route to go down. If you have got the time, there's a lot of free job boards that are out there that you can really sort of get your brand out. I think it's worth networking, like actually building your brand, like being a founder and doing sort of podcasts, doing sort of big events, putting yourself out there. Because I think a lot of people, when they've got early stage businesses, almost feel a little bit of imposter syndrome when they do that. But I think what they're really doing is helping the community and showing, giving people an insight into yourself and your business, and the people that might be watching Bastien here today in 2-3 years time might be the right hire. The next hire could be anywhere. I think you need to have that mindset to share your experiences on LinkedIn, share everything on kind of social media and what you're doing to build that up. And then I think be really creative as well. I think as a small business, like I think Innocent did something really early on in their journey where they, I think, put job adverts at the back of some of their bottles that went out there, and I thought that was awesome, because if you think about you've got customers and they know and believe in your product more than anyone else, and there's going to be some really talented people within those areas. So I think really think outside the box about how you can find people. Bastien mentioned some of the groups that are out there as well, and kind of support groups. There's a lot of talent there. I'd also I'd set up, like, we're going into a potential recession, I'd set up Google alerts on redundancies in the industries that you're working in, because that's obviously an easy place to go and look for people, make your own approaches, find people that can then work and play around on sort of LinkedIn. And if you've got the time to invest in that, I think definitely try and see what you can do to come up with the best options there. So there would be some of the key things, but it is tricky because a lot of early hires come through trust and where people know each other, and that's because you need something at that stage of the business. But I think it's worth, especially from a kind of diversity perspective, making sure that you're opening your net and looking at different other sort of viewpoints and ways of working that can be really helpful as well.
Yeah, just before we go back to you there, Bastien, you made a point right at the end there about sort of being widening your network to make sure you have that diversity of perspective and background, because there is that thing of founders will often bring in people they know because the trust's there and they know them, and it's kind of an immediate solution to a problem. But obviously that creates a risk of a certain level of sort of everybody in the room kind of thinks the same because you all maybe went to university together and came from very similar backgrounds. So I don't know if there's anything you could add there, or any sort of thoughts there.
I think it's a really good point. I think that what we're seeing at the moment is that's the makeup of the vast majority of startup teams, because trust is such a key element of starting something and putting the risk to kind of go out and build something. But I think you've got so many other sort of pools that you can put on, and I think it's worth just waiting. I think when you're making that decision, you trust someone, you know them, you think it's a really natural fit. I think always think about other people or other areas or people that you can partner with, different job boards, like different intern schemes, like just have a real sort of look around about how you can really kind of diversify that pool before pulling that trigger. I think is always important, because once you get too far down the line, it can be really tricky to balance that up.
Yeah, and Bastien, anything you want to add on either sort of creative ways to find people or that kind of diversity of team question?
Yeah, trying to find those groups. There are some, closed Telegram founder groups where there's even back channels you can do due diligence on investors even, and these guys for real, or is this person as good as they claim? So do that. When you are on these sort of knowledge sharing groups, you might say, hey, does anyone know a recruiter for these roles? But really what you're saying is, like, guys, I've got these roles, and then you can bet that they're all gonna go and have a look. That's for sure. LinkedIn, if you can't afford Sales Navigator, keep cycling for free trials with different emails. That's going to work for you. And do specific research. Job titles, levels of experience. There's loads of very intricate searches you can do on LinkedIn Sales Navigator, right? So do that. You don't have to pay for it. You can just, go around. And then once you have found, 20, 30 potential, targets, even just like, lookalikes, if you will, if you're working with an agency, give them as detailed a brief as possible, and then give them as many profiles that you think really fit the sort of jobs you're after. If you're not sure, speak to those people, reach out to them on LinkedIn. There's this sort of reluctance sometimes to do that, but you'll be surprised how helpful people want to be. First of all, it's quite nice to hear that someone, might be interested in you, even if, they can't afford you yet. So they'll be very helpful. Make sure that your job is ready. Okay, so you might be really desperate for someone, but you might not be ready for them, right? What does that mean? Do I have the policies, the structure in place? Am I going to look like I have what it takes to satisfy this person? So sense check your job description. Have you got OKRs? Have you got good policies, good practice? Have you got smart objectives built into all of this stuff? Because they can help you formulate this. You might just say, hey, I noticed you've got all this experience. I'll be very interested in sense checking what we're doing here. Obviously, we're looking to hire someone, but if you just want to help me for 5 minutes, just have a think about all that. People will be extremely helpful. So don't worry, people are not going to be pissed off. If they want to ignore you, they'll just ignore you. But reach out to all these people, and you'll be surprised how often they'll come back to you and be super helpful, actually.
It's interesting, you both sort of hit on something there about that nurture process. So, either Greg, you mentioned sort of putting yourself out there as a founder so that you're building a brand and that people can kind of come along for the journey. And we've seen some great Pitch alumni examples of that. And then you mentioned there about, asking for help. So I think in a funny way, it's almost like the investment process in that you're kind of doing that outreach, making friends, asking for bits of help before necessarily actually bringing them on in an official way. Does that make sense?
Yeah, for sure. It's a bit less scary, and there's going to be less rejection, I think, than the investor process, especially right now. So yeah, don't worry, go for it. Just email. I don't know if this is useful, but I found it extremely useful when I was hiring big teams before to just, hey, what do you think of this? And sometimes people say, yeah, I'm actually looking to jump, so let's do it. And the next thing you know, you've got a team.
Great. And Greg, maybe as a final point, it'd just be interesting, Bastien mentioned there about kind of making sure that you've got actually the role is there in place, not just the need, but the structure.
Yeah, it's a really good point that he made there. I think on the, especially on communication, because you're right, you're going to have to be speaking to people that potentially you're not ready to hire. And I think the way in which you conduct yourself and your business when you're making those decisions, it's a two-way process, an interview process. And I think if you don't communicate well enough, or the decision making that you're showing when you're taking a candidate through that process, it can often give them a really big insight to how you work as a founding team, or how your business really makes decisions. And you need to make sure that that you have, if you're going to go down a route, you need to make sure the communication is there and you push them through. If you're not, you need to make sure that you're very clear about the reasons why you're holding on things, and be very open on that degree. So I think work out your interview process and what that looks like, and really try to keep to that. I think definitely try to decipher the role that you're looking for. We know it can change, and depending on who's available out there in the market at that time, things can alter. But I think it's really important that you have that vision of what you're looking to go out and hire and do that. So yeah, definitely invest the time to make sure that your process is working as well as possible, and make sure the candidate knows that as well when they're speaking to you. If they're going down a formal process, make sure they know that these are the stages you're going to be looking for them to go through, and they can really manage their own schedules as well as possible.
Something I should have mentioned, sorry, quickly. So one piece of proactive stuff you can do is connect with everyone. Go on LinkedIn, connect with every single person that exists, that is around in your industry. Competitors even, but maybe slightly different products. In tech, if you're in tech, or relevant to my industry, it'll be other food brands, right? Not necessarily in the same category. So connect with everyone. Their salespeople, their accounts manager, every single person. They'll usually accept your request, and it's a network that you've got building, and now they know you and you know of them at least. And so when you do have a role that come up in a couple of years, you'll have that connection. They'll be familiar with what you're doing, with the stuff you'll be putting out there, and you'll be seeing who they are, at least their sort of online persona, and you might already have some answers as to would this person fit what we're trying to build over here. So just connect with absolutely everyone. Spend 3-4 days just doing LinkedIn, and I think that's a good proactive step to do.
Yeah, right, Gregory, any last points there, Gregory?
No, I think that's spot on. I think you just could create the create that excitement. You need to have people that are into your network, that are looking at your business, and you need to get to the point where they want to jump on that train and they don't want to miss out on being part of the next big thing. And I think that all comes from communication, and yeah, I think that was put across really well there.
Brilliant. And I think that wraps up really nicely. Hiring somebody, particularly your first few hires, is can be a daunting prospect, but like a lot of challenges you're trying to solve in your startup, it is about getting out there, building your brand, building the community that can give you support with it, right? Like getting people that can give you advice, whether it's validating a recruitment agency or suggesting a hire or just helping you out with the onboarding process, whatever it is. Work hard on that community, get yourself out there. Lots of people do want to help. So hopefully that session was really useful. I really appreciate Bastian and Greg, you taking the time to join us today, talking and sharing a bit of the insight from what you do. So yeah, thanks a lot. Bastian is pitching in the Pitch final next week. So the in-person tickets are sold out, but if you do want to watch, you can stream it online on our YouTube channel. So that's next Thursday. Greg, as said, is from Agora. So if you are at that point when you're ready to think about using an agency and start scaling your startup, do reach out to Greg on LinkedIn or me, and I can put you in touch. So thanks everyone that joined us today. I really appreciate the time there.
Thanks, guys.
Cheers, guys. Thanks for having us.